everyone! So today I actually have a topic that is a little uncomfortable for me to talk about, and that is kind of a large part of why I stopped doing booktube for over a year. I did make some attempts to come back, but largely it was unsuccessful. It was one or two videos and I'd end up petering off, and that is my battle with depression and anxiety. I do realize that I come from a very privileged background where I have readily accessible, like medication and therapy is readily accessible to me, but for the past year I have really been struggling with medication, with my depression, and the long-term effect of that has been I have a lack of focus on my reading, which has meant that I haven't read anything really for the past year. Which means that I don't really have content to produce for this channel. So I am starting to feel a bit more like myself again. I'm starting to come out of the fog. I wanted to be as open and honest about this as possible because I know that there is a lot of stigma against mental health, and I really wanted to talk about how that affected the way that I read and the way that I function, because it's been a really hard process for me. I went from being able to read 500 pages of Dickens like that, and I can barely finish a chapter of a book on bad days when it's really bad, and that's really frustrating. I've never had such an issue with reading. It felt like I lost a huge part of myself. It actually kind of caused me to spiral a bit because I wasn't, reading, I wasn't functioning on who I was. I missed YouTube, I missed creating, I missed talking to people about books. I kind of isolated myself a bit from the booktube community. Thankfully, I have a really good set of friends here on booktube and who have stuck with me even though I'm not the best at responding to messages, and I tend to disappear for months at a time because I'm kind of, navel gazing, and it sucks because it means I'm kind of a bad friend. But I also, I don't want to be a bad friend. It's really hard sometimes when you're in that pit of depression. And it's really hard to talk about it for me. I am very much a private and closed off person. And so to actually talk about it is, my throat right now is so tense because I am so uncomfortable having this discussion, but I also think it's really important to be open and honest about it. So that is why in the past year you haven't seen any content from me. I basically kind of went into a really bad depressive cycle, and I thankfully have been through this before when I was a lot younger, and I recognized the signs and I immediately sought help and have a really good support network. So thankfully everything is starting to get back on track, but adjusting to medications and adjusting to, being not me essentially for so long took me a while to get over that, and kind of I'm finally at a place where I'm like, no, I want to create, I want to read, I actually want to take time out of my day specifically to read. I miss it, and I actually am starting to be able to focus for longer periods of time. So I did decide that I did want to open up a bit of a discussion on ways that I kind of still got a bit of reading in even when I couldn't focus for long periods of time. If you guys will know, in my last video I did a poetry haul, and poetry is actually something that I started reading because I couldn't focus for long periods of time. So a lot of the modern poetry I picked up is quite short, so it's little tidbits, and it's quite easy to get through, and you can reread it. It's actually, you pick up more and more the more you reread it, which is great when you can't focus and sometimes you forget what you've read. So poetry has been really great. Also, sorry if you can hear the air conditioning in the background. It is really hot in southern Ontario right now. I also started reading a lot of short stories. So I've got a couple short story collections that I want to do reviews for that I read during this year-long sabbatical and kind of refiguring stuff out. So yeah, those are two things that kind of helped me. I also read a lot of webcomics and comics in general. Just generally, I focused on shorter things. I tried not to beat myself up too much. I haven't been reading classics as much, which is okay. I have read a lot of classics compared to the average person, and I am kind of okay with taking a break from classics. What kind of started to get me back into reading is reading things that I loved as a teenager. So things like horror and fantasy and sci-fi, and things that for me are really easy to get into because they're things that capture my attention and I don't really have to work at. They're very plot driven as opposed to character driven, like you want to find out what happens next. There's those cliffhanger endings, and it's things that kind of, you know, force you to want to read more, whereas classics, I find I need the focus, I need to be able to dissect them, I need to be able to draw connections to other classics and understand every little nuance, whereas with sci-fi and fantasy, if I'm not firing on all cylinders, I can totally still work my way through a mass market paperback, and that is absolutely fantastic. That's also not to say that fantasy or horror or sci-fi are any like lesser than classics. It's just the way that my brain is working, I'm able to absorb that information a lot better in those genres in kind of a more, you know, accessible form, and I think that that is absolutely fantastic. I used to love Anne Rice was one of my favorite writers growing up, and as you guys know, I love Tolkien, but I did also read a lot of fantasy as a teenager. I read a lot of Robert Jordan and a lot of Terry Goodkind, and I missed that a bit. I got a little, you know, focused on being quote-unquote well-read, and I got a little bit, you know, now that I am struggling to read classics because of my lack of focus, I'm kind of like, okay, maybe I go back to reading some more, like, you know, things that I kind of turn my nose up at, and I'm absolutely loving it. So I'm hoping you guys are okay with the slight change in my channel. I am still going to read classics. I am always, and have been for the past, you know, over a decade of my life, devoted to reading classics. So that will not change. It'll just slow down a little and be, you know, there will be stuff that is maybe a little bit more popular, and that's totally okay. I will still critically analyze this stuff. I have a review coming up of a Stephen King novel that I do have some issues with that I am looking forward to discussing with you guys, and I am so glad to be back. The feedback on my latest video has been so positive, and even though it was really out of focus, it warmed my heart. So thank you guys for welcoming me back, and I am so happy to be back with you guys. Also, leave in the comments down below if you guys struggle with depression or anxiety or anything that makes reading hard to focus on, and if you have any tips, that'd be really great to get a discussion going, because I mean, I have certain things that help me, but you know, things that help other people, absolutely fantastic. Let's kind of create a little support network around that, because it is really hard sometimes when you feel really isolated. So I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!